it's great to follow Doina, and thanks for speaking so much on some of the really important pieces of local examples of what's going on. And yeah, like it was said in the introduction, I've been doing kind of pretty much full-time political organising since I was about 17 and now 24, so that's quite a significant part of my lifetime. And yeah, I'm currently a member of the RISE, which is the Radical Youth Space for Educations, and we're a 4-year-old political education, internationalist and community organising project based here in Stroud. Right now we're based out of Red's Youth Hub, which is on Threadneedle Street in the centre of town. And I'm going to share some bits and pieces about our work, and I'm going to cover lots, but I'm also going to miss lots, so you can find out a lot more about us if you go to our website, and we've also got a little stall of stuff over there if you want to have a look at. We're also part of an internationalist network, which is called the Planet Repairs Action Learning Educational Revolution, also known as PRALA to make it a bit shorter, which is basically a grassroots to grassroots internationalist network, which is all focused on the educational change that needs to happen for us to get where we're trying to go. And it's kind of largely come out of the international social movement for African reparations amongst other political legacies, and you can also find more about them if you're over at our little stall. But I'm sharing all of that just because I don't want to say things and then people go, oh, it was interesting or not interesting, what that person said, and then you don't know where to actually get involved in what we're doing. So now that the plugs are out of the way, I'll share a few of my thoughts. This panel felt very broad when I was kind of sitting down to write some of my thoughts about it, and the brief I was given is how to grow power and organise in our communities. It feels important to ask, what do we mean by building power? What do we mean by organise? And who is our community exactly, like Donna was saying? And not to be pedantic, but because I think we're not going to all follow along if we don't start on the same page. When I'm talking about building power, I'm talking about building the tools and ability that we need to actually affect the changes we want to see. And these are quite fundamental changes from our perspective. I think we're talking about a total upheaval of our political system, and that's not something that's just going to be resolved by replacing whichever party is in power. We know we have to change the capitalist system, for example, which is literally eating the planet. And we know that also there's going to be a fight when we try and kick the rich and powerful out of leading our political sphere to take control of our economy and use it to actually solve our problems. All of these kind of things are really going to come under fire, as we saw, for example, with Corbyn's Labour, and that wasn't even necessarily a hugely radical project. So I think when I'm talking about building power, I really mean how are we going to be able to defend our movements and really fight back with politics at all sides of P, as Dwayne said. So not just the politics to defend, but the politics to win as well. When I'm saying organising, I mean the long tradition of really grassroots people's work to build a better world, from Thomas Sankara to Sylvia Pankhurst and 1,000 other named and unnamed radical ancestors who've organised their people across the world. We really need to study these people because we can't afford to repeat the mistakes. And when I'm talking about community, well, in the RISE we talk about two communities, the community of place, which I think, yeah, like I said, Doina really touched on beautifully, and the community of affinity. So community of place is, who we live around, your neighbours, the people that sell you food, the doctors who work in your local hospitals. And when we say community of affinity, we mean the people who we have a shared purpose with, the people who we work with, people who are invested, we're invested in each other's success and failings. So for us as a RISE, that's a lot of youth organisers across the country, and then a lot of our family across the world as well in the PRALA network. So we feel like these are both really important, and we need to link them for the most powerful ability to create change. I didn't want to sit here and act like I have all the answers, but I also didn't want to act like we don't know some things to be true. So from the work that we've done and the relationships we've built, so I'm kind of framing this as what are questions we still have and things that we're struggling with, and what are lessons that we've learned along the way, basically. There's obviously an emphasis on young people, because I know that's why I'm invited to speak here. But I always want to say that speaking as a youth organiser, it's not just about young people, it's about what do we find to be important about what's effective in our work. So it will extend a little bit beyond just what youth work we do. So, what questions do we have? This is a mixture of things, it's a very non-exhaustive list that us as youth organisers in Stroud are trying to solve. Some of these things we have more answers to than others, but yeah, really showing this because I just want to invite this to be what can you guys contribute to the work that we're doing? What answers do you have? What better questions do you have? And ideas on that kind of thing. So one of the ones which we are always up against is how to access enough of the material conditions to support young people to actually step off the treadmill or whatever you want to call it of the life path that they're put on. So whether that's money, whether that's access to housing, whether that's space to come together and feed each other and those kind of things, is how do we actually get enough of the resources together to be able to sustain our work without it becoming the whole focus of our work to do crowdfunding and, you know, all of that kind of thing. So that's something that we're really working on. You know, we've done stuff in the past, reclaiming space in town, we reclaimed the summer school, we've also got a building currently at Reds where we're doing a lot of feeding people and things like that, but it's constantly something we're up against and still trying to answer how to do sustainably. Kind of touching on that, something that we're also trying to work out how to do more effectively is support each other to survive enough without it being at the expense of the wider work that we're trying to do. I mean, lots of people, you talk about young people, you talk about the mental health crisis. It's true. It's really a big issue that we're facing, and it's a lot of work to really be there for each other and provide the support that the wider systems or society we're living in isn't able to provide. And it makes it really hard to organise things when everybody's really depressed. So we work on it and we do a lot of work, but it's difficult for that not to become the whole focus. And while we're here for that, like to look after each other, that can't be the be all and end all of what we're trying to do. Another question is, how do we focus enough on what needs to be done? There's so much that needs doing. I think in Stroud we've launched 4 or 5 different projects since the Rise has been born, and it's difficult to juggle all of the different strands of work that we're like, this really needs to happen. So for example, we launched Mutiny, Stroud's Youth Assembly, which is like a youth-led democratic process basically where people come together and discuss what are the issues that we're facing, but like Donald said, like what are people actually thinking, what actually needs to be done, and that's currently actually being campaigned to bring down the Black Boy clock, so if anyone wants to check that out. We also launched Sister, which is an internationalist group, Stroud and Internationalist Solidarity Together for Earth Repairs. We've also done work called School as a Crime Scene, which you can read a bit about over there actually, but that was getting young people to investigate the crimes in their schools and miseducation they're facing. We're also now running a youth hub and actually doing what we think is the only youth for youth provision in the town, so that's a lot of work as well. But it's very difficult to focus on and to feel like we're being tactical enough. The last thing I wanted to pull out as a question that we're asking is about how to really effectively do really powerful intergenerational work and bring older people into the youth-centered work that we're doing in a way that really mobilises them into action and makes everyone feel important without losing the centering of the youth voice. And I think there's examples where we've done that well. I think everyone who's been involved in the process knows there's been teething troubles, and I think that's something to pull out as well. If you're interested in becoming sort of intergenerational work, for example, we have a dinner and discussion the 13th of November, so Wednesday evening, which you can come along to and have some of these chats with us. But onto some of the things that I feel like are lessons we have learned. And to do this, I wanted to bring in some quotes from alders and elders that we've worked with as the Rise. Lots of these quotes were recorded at Decolonial Open University, so that is a project launched by the Polar Network that I mentioned before. And it's a place for communities who have learned different lessons in their fights in different places in different parts of the world to kind of come together and learn from each other. Like a university, but a community, because it's for communities. And it's important to do this because one of the things we hear really commonly from people, like young people locally, is they don't want to feel isolated. They want to feel like there's people all around the world that are taking up the same kind of battles as they are to really feel connected and more powerful. So the first quote I'm going to share is from an organiser called Kofi Klou, who has been a leader in the Pan-African reparations space a lot of the time. For example, an organisation called Stop the Mangamizi. And a quote from him is, "The best pages of history are the ones ordinary people of conscience decided to write." This feels like a really important quote to us because anyone, if you look back at history, you can find an example of someone from your context, someone who was in many ways like you, doing radical work if you look hard enough. So much of what we're taught about why the world is the way it is really not true, and the more that you study, as far as I'm concerned, the more that you'll see that what happens, when change happens, it's really just people giving it a try. The more that I've learned and the more that I try, the more I really believe change is possible, It's just that actually a lot of it is a matter of getting people to believe that they should really take responsibility for being part of that process. And I think that's a good point to raise also around having someone like Zarah here, where although we can support people and back people when they prove their integrity, we can't rely on individual figures to lead some sort of movement. We all need to be people of conscience.
Absolutely.
We've got an event coming up on the 8th of November where we're commemorating the Stroud water riots, which is when people 200 years ago rose up and threw some people in the mill ponds protest. So just to note that one for you. To pull out another quote, here's a quote from someone called Omar Farfan, who works as part of an organisation called Radio Zapote, which does like community radio work in Mexico. And this quote is, "Organisations have a responsibility to always keep a foot in the front lines of resistance. That is how we save our souls from being complicit." And I think this is really important because if we're looking to build power and actually challenge the systems, we really need to take note of this, because so many organisations end up accidentally backing up the systems that they exist within, or being defanged by bureaucracy, funding, want for comfort, and we see that a lot of the time communities that have been the most oppressed are people who have the most creative solutions to the problems that we're facing. And you can see that on both the global and a local scale. And sometimes there's a certain amount of arrogance, I think, present in like leftist organising, where it's like, oh, we're the first to do these things, or, oh, you know, like there's no answers that exist. And actually it's like, if we look at where work is already happening and where wins are really already taking place, people who are making really big sacrifices to build power and organise, then that can really support us. I think this relationship to grassroots anti-imperial communities is also fundamentally something that, if we're talking about mass social change and if we're talking about, you know, party politics as well, I'd really like to know if your party is serious about reparations, for example, and understanding that as more than just financial compensation, but actually like the work we need to do to repair all of our relationships to each other in the world we live in. I've got one or two more quotes if I have the time for it. So another one is from someone called Cecilia, who is an auntie in the Ferrocarril, which is a long acronym that I won't talk through right now, but it's an artisanal and peasants women's union in Peru. And the quote from her is, "Organisation is the only way that we will win. The struggle for the earth, the water, the seeds and the light." And I think this is really important because we really need a level of seriousness about the work that we're trying to do, and that as if this really is political, like pivotal to our lives, because it is. Not as if it's like a hobby that can slide down our to-do list or afford us to be sloppy. In the Rise we do, for example, like regular criticism and self-criticism of each other, which is something that we've learned from the landless workers movement in Brazil and also the Kurdish struggle. And we learn about all these systems and structures to support ourselves. We also study what makes other groups fall apart. Spoiler alert, if you look across the country, I would say that most things that have brought down youth organising spaces in the last couple of years is patriarchal violence. And I think it's important because there's an attitude sometimes that we need to counter productivity culture, which I really agree, we need to detach the idea of anyone, how much they can do is how worthy they are and all that kind of thing. But sometimes it leans into treating hard work and seriousness as if that's toxic, and that's not going to take down the US military. So we need to learn from people about coming back to Kofi, there's a quote which says, with the mindset colonialism gives us, it is impossible to repair ourselves or the planet. And this one's really important to us because we really believe that the work that we're doing is an educational process and we have to learn so much together and unlearn so much as well. We really look at education as how do we learn the skills we need to solve the problems that we face. And we really believe, like I said a little earlier, that the battle a lot of the time here is actually the mental battle. A lot of it is about really getting people to get out of the apathy or to get out of the belief that they can't do anything. And you know, I think lots of people have probably heard the quote from Audre Lorde, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." But we talk a lot about like how seriously are we actually trying to identify the master's tools, and how are we really trying to counter them. I think one of the things that we talk about a lot is how the miseducation, the schooling system, is still probably the number one criminal institution that's not talked about systemically enough in the left in the UK. And it's important to us that if your party, for example, is serious about changing the political landscape, we really need to take head on the education system, and need to do that with young people at the front and centre. And then I have one more quote to share with you, also from Uncle Kofi, which says, "It is imperative that we draw the strength to work together in the repair of humanity. It's really hard doing this work. I think everyone on the panel will probably agree with me. I cried at least 3 times writing this speech. I overwork a lot. Sometimes I don't take things up when I should, and all of these kind of things. And sometimes people say things like, "Oh, it's really good. It would be really good to have young people involved, or it would be really good to do internationalist work, or it would be really good to work across the class divisions in this town," but then don't act on it, and then act kind of like it's not really possible. And I think what I want to say is that it is possible. It's just really hard. But this quote really personally makes me feel like we have to draw the strength, right? We have it. We're all survivors, that's what human beings are, and we just need to break our addiction to this system that we're in to really thrive and work together. I think about how I feel about my close family, and I think about recently when some of the flotilla that were going out to Gaza were there was on risk of attack, and I was like, it was the night and I was going to bed, and I was like, if this was my sister, this was my close family, I would not be going to sleep right now. Mm-hmm. And it was a really, one of those moments where you're really in the emotions of it. And obviously we can't relate to everyone like that all the time. It's probably impossible, but we can dare to try more. And we do need to remind ourselves of the depth of that feeling. And when you do that, it suddenly does feel like an imperative, like Kofi said, like we can draw the strength and like we have to work together for the repair. And that if we do, beautiful things will happen.